The blood-soaked letter trembled in Eliza Campbell's hands as she read the final line. "You are no daughter of mine." The ink was still fresh, the paper still warm from the messenger's saddlebag, but the words cut through her like they'd been carved in stone. Eliza stood frozen on the porch of the modest cabin she now called home, the vast Wyoming landscape stretching before her. The golden September light of 1878 cast long shadows across Riverton's dusty Main Street in the distance. At 22, she had expected many things in her life, but being cast out by her own family wasn't one of them. Bad news. The deep voice startled her. Owen Wyatt stood at the bottom of the porch steps, his tall frame casting an even longer shadow. His dark hair peeked out beneath his worn leather hat, and those keen blue eyes missed nothing. In the 2 weeks since he'd offered her shelter on his small ranch outside of town, Eliza had learned that the 30-year-old cowboy spoke little but observed much. "My family has officially disowned me," Eliza said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the storm raging inside her, "for leaving Thomas." Owen's expression hardened at the mention of Thomas Bennett, Eliza's husband of 3 miserable years. The wealthy cattle baron who had courted her with promises of security and comfort, only to reveal his true nature once the marriage certificate was signed. "They say I've brought shame to the Campbell name," she continued, finally letting the letter drop to her side. "That no decent woman leaves her husband, regardless of circumstances." "Circumstances," Owen repeated, the single word carrying the weight of what they both knew. The bruises that had barely faded from her wrists, the scar near her hairline, the nightmares that still woke her screaming. "I have nowhere to go," Eliza whispered, reality settling cold and hard in her chest. "No family left." Owen climbed the steps slowly, deliberate in his movements as always. He stopped before her, not too close. He never stood too close, having learned early that sudden movements made her flinch. "Then I'll be your family now," he said simply, as if offering her water on a hot day. Eliza stared at him, this man who'd found her hiding in his barn 2 weeks ago, who'd never once asked why she was running or demanded she leave. This quiet cowboy who'd given her the spare room in his cabin without question, who left food outside her door when she couldn't face coming out. "You barely know me," she said. "I know enough." He nodded toward the letter. "I know you're brave, braver than most men I've met. Takes courage to leave when staying's the easier path. My father says I'm foolish and ungrateful, that Thomas gave me everything." "Did he give you peace?" Owen asked. "Respect, safety in your own home." Tears welled in Eliza's eyes, but she blinked them away. She'd done enough crying. "No," she answered truthfully, "none of those things." "Then he gave you nothing worth having." Owen reached slowly for the letter, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he took it gently from her fingers. This is just words on paper. Family isn't always blood." "What is it then?" Eliza asked. "People who stand by you when standing's hard." He folded the letter and tucked it into his vest pocket. "People who choose you day after day." A gust of wind swept across the porch, carrying the scent of pine and approaching rain. In the distance, thunder rolled over the mountains. "Storm's coming," Owen said, his eyes on the horizon. "But we've got a solid roof. We'll weather it fine." Eliza knew he wasn't just talking about the rain. "What about Thomas?" she asked, voicing the fear that had haunted her since she'd fled. "He won't let me go easily. He's a powerful man in these parts." "He is," Owen acknowledged, "but this is my land, my home." His eyes met hers, steady and certain. "Our home now if you want it to be, and I protect what's mine." The possessiveness in his words should have frightened her, reminded her of Thomas's controlling grip. But Owen's protection felt different, like a shelter rather than a cage. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door," she said. "Trouble finds its way regardless," he replied with a slight shrug. "Might as well face it for something worthwhile." A raindrop fell, then another, pattering on the wooden porch roof above them. "Come inside," Owen said, turning toward the door. "I've got stew on the stove." As simple as that. No demands, no expectations. Just shelter from the storm and warm food. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like everything. Eliza followed him inside, the door closing behind her on her old life as the rain began to fall in earnest across the Wyoming wilderness. The cabin was modest but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a main living area with a stone fireplace and a small kitchen. Owen had built it himself 5 years ago when he'd purchased the land after years of working other men's ranches. It wasn't grand like the Bennett mansion in town, but it was clean and solid, the furniture handcrafted with care. "Sit," Owen said, gesturing to the table as he moved to the stove. "You've barely eaten today." Eliza obeyed, watching as he ladled thick beef stew into 2 bowls. His movements were efficient, no wasted motion. It was one of the first things she'd noticed about him, how he moved with purpose, each action deliberate and measured. "Thank you," she said as he set a bowl before her along with a chunk of fresh bread. "For everything." Owen nodded, taking the seat across from her. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the rain drumming a steady rhythm on the roof. "What will you do now?" he finally asked. Eliza paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. It was a question she'd been avoiding. What did a woman with no family, no money of her own, and a vengeful husband do in 1878 Wyoming territory? "I don't know," she admitted. "I can cook clean so. But in a town this size, word spreads. No respectable household will hire Thomas Bennett's runaway wife." "You can stay here," Owen said matter-of-factly. "The ranch keeps me busy from dawn till dusk. Could use help with the household, the garden. The chicken coop needs tending." "People will talk," she warned. "An unmarried woman living with a man, people always talk, let them." He broke off a piece of bread. "Unless you're concerned for your reputation." A bitter laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. "My reputation? I'm already a fallen woman in their eyes, a wife who abandoned her duties, her vows." "Those vows work both ways," Owen said, his voice hardening slightly. "He broke his first. The law doesn't see it that way, nor does the church." Eliza set down her spoon. "In their eyes, a husband can do as he pleases with his wife." "I'm not much for what other folks think the law should be," Owen replied. "I believe in what's right. What happened to you wasn't right." His directness still surprised her. In her world, the world of her wealthy family and Thomas's influential circle's unpleasantness was hidden behind proper smiles and closed doors. Problems weren't discussed, they were concealed. "How did you come to be out here alone?" she asked, curious about this solitary man who seemed content with his own company. "Wanted my own place. Land that answered to no one but me." He shrugged. "Worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana for 10 years, saved every penny, bought this plot when most thought it wasn't worth having. And now I've got 40 head of cattle, 12 horses, and enough saved to get through a hard winter." Pride touched his voice briefly. "It's not much compared to the big spreads, but it's mine. No debts, no obligations, no family," she ventured. Something flickered across his face. "Had a brother, lost him in 65, Auntie him." "The war," Eliza said softly. "I'm sorry. Long time ago now." Owen pushed his empty bowl aside. "Parents passed before that. It's been just me since." "Doesn't it get lonely?" The question slipped out before she could think better of it. He considered her words, taking his time as he always did before speaking. "Sometimes, but lonely's better than being with the wrong people." The truth of that statement settled deep in Eliza's bones. How many dinner parties and social gatherings had she attended on Thomas's arm, surrounded by people yet completely alone? "Yes," she agreed. "It is." Owen rose and took their empty bowls to the wash basin. "The offer stands. Stay as long as you need. Help around the place if you want to earn your keep, though that's not necessary." "I want to," she said quickly. "I need to be useful," he nodded, understanding without her having to explain. After years of being told she was worthless, doing meaningful work was more than occupation, it was healing. "We'll start tomorrow then." He glanced out the window where dusk was falling, the rain still coming down in sheets. Storms set in for the night, best get some rest. Eliza stood, smoothing her simple dress. "Good night, Mr. Wyatt." "Owen," he corrected gently. "If we're to be family, it's Owen." "Owen," she repeated, testing the name. "Good night, then." "Good night, Eliza." As she closed the door to her small bedroom, Eliza realized it was the first time he'd said her name aloud. It sounded different in his voice, strong, whole. Not the fragile, breakable thing Thomas had made it seem. That night, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled across the plains, Eliza slept soundly for the first time in years. Dawn broke clear and brilliant after the storm, painting the wet landscape in shades of gold and amber. Eliza woke early, determined to prove herself useful. By the time Owen came in from the morning feeding, she had coffee brewing, biscuits in the oven, and eggs ready to fry. "You're up early," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Thought I'd start earning my keep," she replied, sliding eggs onto plates. They fell into a routine over the following days. Eliza took charge of the household, cooking, cleaning, mending clothes worn thin from work. She tended the vegetable garden, gathered eggs, and learned to make cheese from the milk of Owen's 2 dairy cows. Owen showed her how to work the pump when it stuck, how to bank the fire at night so it would last until morning, and which fence posts needed replacing before winter. He taught without condescension, explaining things clearly then stepping back to let her learn through doing. It was a far cry from her life with Thomas, where she'd been treated as an ornament, useful only for display at social functions and in his bed. Here, her work mattered. Here, she was seen. A week passed, then 2. October arrived with its shorter days and chill mornings. Eliza began preserving vegetables for winter, using knowledge half remembered from her grandmother's kitchen before her family had gained wealth and status. One evening, as they sat before the fire after supper, Owen handed her a small leather pouch. "What's this?" she asked, feeling the weight of coins inside. "Your share," he said. "For the work." Eliza stared at the pouch. "But you're already providing my food, shelter, work deserves pay," he interrupted firmly. "Put it aside, spend it, your choice, but it's yours." She opened the pouch, counting the coins with trembling fingers. It wasn't much by her former standards, but it was the first money that had ever truly belonged to her alone. "Thank you," she whispered. Owen nodded, returning to the piece of harness he was mending. After a moment, he spoke without looking up. "Might want to put some by for winter boots. Those fancy things you arrived in won't do much good in snow." Eliza looked down at her once fine shoes, now scuffed and cracking from hard use. "I'll need to go into town." The statement hung in the air between them. She hadn't left the ranch since arriving, both of them knowing that Thomas likely had people watching for her. "I'll take you," Owen said. "Tomorrow, need supplies anyway." Sleep eluded Eliza that night, anxiety gnawing at her as she thought about venturing into Riverton. What if they encountered Thomas? What if the townspeople shunned her? What if her family had spread vicious rumors? She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to morning light and the smell of coffee. After a quick breakfast, Owen hitched the wagon while Eliza donned her plainest dress and a bonnet that would help shield her face. The journey into town took nearly an hour, the wagon bumping along the rutted trail that connected the ranch to Riverton. As they approached the outskirts of town, Eliza's hands twisted nervously in her lap. Owen noticed but said nothing, his silence more comforting than empty reassurances would have been. Riverton was small but growing, with a main street lined by wooden storefronts, general store, livery, saloon, hotel, and the newer bank building made of brick. A few side streets branched off, housing modest homes and boarding houses. Owen pulled the wagon to a stop in front of Jensen's general store. "I'll be right beside you," he said quietly before helping her down. They were halfway to the store's entrance when a woman's voice called out, sharp and cutting. "Well, look who's shown her face in town." Eliza froze, recognizing the voice of Harriet Turner, Thomas's cousin and one of the town's most notorious gossips. "Mrs. Bennett," Harriet continued loudly, ensuring others would hear as she approached. "Or are you calling yourself Mrs. Campbell again, now that you've abandoned your lawful husband?" Eliza felt Owen stiffen beside her, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm. This was her battle. "Good morning, Mrs. Turner," she said evenly. "I'm just here for supplies." "Supplies? Is that what we're calling it now?" Harriet's eyes flicked meaningfully to Owen. "Thomas is beside himself with worry for your safety and reputation, you know. Such a devoted husband even after your instability." Anger flared hot in Eliza's chest. Instability was the story Thomas had clearly spread, that his delicate wife had suffered a nervous breakdown, confused and irrational. "I am perfectly sound of mind, Mrs. Turner," Eliza replied, loud enough for the small crowd gathering nearby to hear. And my reasons for leaving are my own. Living alone with a man, unmarried. Decent women don't behave this way, Eliza. Your poor parents are mortified. Owen stepped forward then, his voice low but carrying. Mrs. Turner, I suggest you find business of your own to attend to. Harriet drew herself up indignantly. Mr. Wyatt, I'm simply concerned for a confused young woman's welfare. No, Owen cut her off. You're spreading gossip that isn't yours to share. Miss Campbell is under my protection now, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. The murmurs from onlookers grew, but Owen's reputation as a man who minded his own business and expected others to do the same carried weight. Harriet, finding her audience less receptive than expected, sniffed disdainfully and continued on her way, though not before calling back. Thomas will be interested to know where his wife has been hiding. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs as Owen guided her into the general store, his hand a steady presence at the small of her back. Inside, the store owner, Mr. Jensen, a balding man with kind eyes, greeted them with awkward politeness. Mr. Wyatt, good to see you, and Mrs. Miss Campbell, Mr. Jensen, Owen nodded. We'll need flour, coffee, sugar, and some winter supplies. As they gathered their items, Eliza became aware of whispers from the two women examining fabric at the far counter. Their glances were not hostile, merely curious, but they stung nonetheless. This was the price of her freedom becoming the subject of town gossip, her reputation in tatters. Don't pay them any mind, Owen said quietly as they waited for Mr. Jensen to tally their purchases. It's hard not to, she admitted. All my life I was taught that a woman's reputation was her most valuable possession, more valuable than her safety, her happiness. Owen shook his head. Those who matter won't judge, those who judge don't matter. Mr. Jensen returned with their supplies packed and ready. As Owen paid, the shopkeeper leaned in slightly. Mr. Wyatt, might want to be aware Mr. Bennett was asking about you last week, asking who your friends are, where exactly your property lines run. He coughed discreetly. Just thought you should know. Appreciate the warning, Owen replied, his expression unchanged though Eliza saw tension in the set of his shoulders. They left the store quickly after that, making one more stop at the mercantile where Eliza purchased sturdy winter boots and warm stockings. The entire time, she felt eyes following them, judging, speculating. They were loading the last of their supplies when a shadow fell across the wagon. Eliza looked up, her breath catching as she recognized Sheriff Miller, a man firmly in Thomas's pocket. Mr. Wyatt, the sheriff said, thumbs hooked in his belt. Miss Campbell. Owen straightened, his stance casual but alert. Sheriff. Interesting situation we have here, Miller continued. Mr. Bennett's been making quite a fuss about his missing wife. Says she's unwell, needs medical attention. Is that so? Owen's tone was neutral. It is. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He's also mentioned pressing charges, abandonment, maybe even theft of personal property. Eliza's hands clenched into fists. Personal property. I took nothing but the clothes on my back. His word against yours, madam, Miller shrugged. Law tends to side with the husband in these matters. And what about the law against assault, Sheriff? Owen asked quietly. Does that not apply when it happens behind closed doors? The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. I'm not here to make trouble, Wyatt, just delivering a message. Mr. Bennett wants his wife back home where she belongs, says he's willing to forgive this. Indiscretion, I'm not going back, Eliza said firmly. Then things might get complicated. Miller adjusted his hat. Wyoming territory's still pretty loose on some laws, but a husband's rights to his wife are pretty clear. Just think on it. He nodded to them both before ambling away. The ride back to the ranch was tense and quiet. Only when the town was well behind them did Eliza release the breath she'd been holding. He'll come for me, she said, staring at the horizon. Thomas won't let this stand. His pride won't allow it. Owen's hands were steady on the reins. Let him come. You don't know what he's capable of, Eliza warned. His family has connections, money, influence. And I have a Winchester rifle and clear aim, Owen replied matter-of-factly, but it won't come to that. How can you be so sure? Because men like Bennett are cowards at heart. They prey on those they see as weaker. Stand up to them, they usually back down. Eliza wasn't convinced, but she said nothing more. The dread that had settled in her stomach since the encounter with the sheriff remained, a constant reminder that her newfound peace was fragile. That night, after a quiet supper, Owen disappeared into the shed behind the house. When he returned, he was carrying a small revolver. "Ever fired one of these?" he asked, setting it on the table. Eliza shook her head. "Tomorrow we'll practice," he said. Everyone on a ranch should know how to handle a firearm for snakes, coyotes, other threats. She understood what went unsaid. "You think it will come to that?" "I think it's better to be prepared and not need it than need it and not be prepared." He showed her how to check if it was loaded, how to hold it properly. "We'll start with targets tomorrow. It's not difficult once you get the feel of it." The next morning, Owen set up empty bottles on fence posts at varying distances. Under his patient instruction, Eliza learned to load, aim, and fire. Her first shots went wild, the recoil stronger than she'd expected. But by midday, she was hitting the closer targets with increasing accuracy. "Good," Owen said as she shattered her fifth bottle. "You're a natural." The praise warmed her more than it should have. "I never thought I'd learn to shoot. Lot of things you probably never thought you'd do," he replied with one of his rare small smiles. "Life out here requires it, self-reliance. Is that why you chose this life, to be self-reliant?" Owen considered the question, squinting against the autumn sun. "Partly. After the war, couldn't stand being crowded, needed space, sky, room to breathe. Were you very young when you fought?" 17 when I enlisted, 20 when it ended, felt a lifetime older." He turned to reload the revolver. "Came west after, never looked back." Eliza tried to imagine Owen as a boy soldier facing the horrors of war. It explained much about him: his quietness, his self-containment, his dislike of unnecessary conflict. "I'm glad you found peace here," she said softly. He handed her the reloaded gun. "Most days, 6 more shots, then we break for lunch." The days grew shorter as October deepened. Eliza learned the rhythms of ranch life: the pre-dawn rising, the constant work that filled daylight hours, the bone-deep weariness that came with honest labor. She learned to chop wood without blistering her hands, to mend fences, to tell which clouds meant rain and which were merely passing through. And somewhere in those days of shared work and quiet evenings, something shifted between them. It wasn't dramatic, no declarations, no sudden revelations. Just a gradual softening, like river stones worn smooth by constant water. Owen began to speak more, telling her stories of his cattle drive days, of the characters he'd met, the places he'd seen. Eliza shared memories of her childhood before her father's business success had changed their family, when they'd lived simply and happily. They were careful never to touch, maintaining the proper distance that propriety demanded. But sometimes their hands would brush while passing a tool or dish, and the brief contact would linger in Eliza's awareness long afterward. She told herself it was merely gratitude; she felt appreciation for his protection and kindness. But in the privacy of night, she admitted the truth. She was drawn to this quiet, honorable man in a way she'd never experienced before. Not the giddy infatuation she'd felt during Thomas's courtship, but something deeper, more grounded. Whether Owen felt anything similar, she couldn't tell. He was unfailingly considerate, but revealed little of his inner thoughts. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late October, a bitterly cold evening that hinted at the winter to come. They'd eaten supper and were sitting before the fire, Eliza mending a shirt while Owen cleaned his rifle, a nightly ritual since their trip to town. The sound of approaching horses broke the peaceful silence. Not one or two, but several, their hoofbeats thundering toward the cabin. Owen was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Get your revolver," he said quietly. "Stay inside." Eliza's heart pounded as she retrieved the gun from her bedside drawer. Through the window, she could see 5 riders approaching in the moonlight, lanterns swinging from their saddles. At their head, unmistakable even in shadow, was Thomas. Owen stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. "That's far enough," his voice carried clearly through the night air. The riders stopped about 20 yards from the cabin. Thomas nudged his horse forward a few steps. "Wyatt," he called, "I've come for my wife." "No such person here," Owen replied evenly. "Just me and Miss Campbell." Thomas's laugh held no humor. You're harboring my legal wife, Wyatt. That's against the law. I've been patient, thinking she'd come to her senses, but my patience is at an end. The lady makes her own decisions, Owen said. She's chosen not to return to you. I suggest you respect that and leave. Respect. Thomas's voice rose. You talk to me of respect while you keep my wife in your bed. From inside, Eliza could see Owen's posture stiffen, though his voice remained calm. You do well to watch your accusations, Bennett. Or what? Thomas's tone was mocking now. I've got 4 men with me and the law on my side. Sheriff Miller was quite clear about a husband's rights. Sheriff's not here, Owen pointed out. Just you making demands on my property. I don't take kindly to that. One of the other riders shifted nervously. Thomas, maybe we should— Shut up, Davis, Thomas snapped. We're not leaving without her. He raised his voice. Eliza, come out here now. Stop this foolishness before you embarrass yourself further. Eliza's hands trembled around the revolver. The commanding tone, the underlying threat, it all brought back memories of the pain and fear that had defined their marriage. Last warning, Bennett, Owen said, his rifle now raised slightly. Get off my land. Thomas laughed again. Or what? You'll shoot us all, then you'll hang for sure. He turned to his companions. Davis, Reynolds, check the barn. Carson with me, we'll search the house. Before they could move, Eliza stepped onto the porch beside Owen, her revolver steady in her hands despite her fear. Thomas, she called, her voice stronger than she felt. I'm not going anywhere with you, not tonight, not ever. In the lantern light, she could see the fury contort his handsome face, the face that had once charmed her, before she'd learned what lay beneath. You ungrateful whore, he snarled. After everything I gave you, you gave me bruises, she replied, loud enough for his men to hear. You gave me fear, you gave me pain, nothing worth keeping. Thomas's face flushed dark with rage and embarrassment. You're confused, Eliza, unwell. Everyone in town knows it. Come home and we'll say no more about this. Indiscretion. No, the single word felt like freedom. Thomas's hand moved to his hip where his pistol rested. I won't ask again. Neither will I, Owen said quietly. Leave, now. For a tense moment, it seemed violence was inevitable. Then one of the riders, an older man named Reynolds who'd worked Thomas's ranch for years, spoke up. Mr. Bennett, this isn't right. We came to fetch your wife, not start a shooting war. He looked uncomfortable. If the lady doesn't want to come. She's not in her right mind, Thomas insisted. Wyatt here has filled her head with nonsense, turned her against me. Seems to me she's speaking pretty clearly for herself, Reynolds observed. Thomas whirled on him. I pay your wages, Reynolds. You'll do as I say. The older man shook his head slowly. Not for this. Not for dragging a woman somewhere against her will. He turned his horse. I'm heading back to town. Me too, Davis muttered, already reining his mount around. Cowards, Thomas shouted after them. You're all fired, but the damage was done. With his support crumbling, Thomas's bluster faltered. Carson, the only remaining rider, looked increasingly uncomfortable. Maybe we should come back with the sheriff, he suggested. Do this proper-like. Thomas's eyes darted between Owen's rifle, Eliza's revolver, and his retreating men. His pride battled visibly with his sense of self-preservation. This isn't over, he finally spat. The law's on my side, Eliza. You're still my wife. Not for long, she replied steadily. I'll file for divorce, he laughed bitterly. On what grounds? No court will grant it. Cruelty, she said clearly. Abandonment when I fled, and if that's not enough, I have witnesses to the beatings. Your housekeeper, Mary. The doctor who set my broken wrist last spring. Thomas's face went pale. He hadn't expected her to fight back, to have thought this through. You wouldn't dare bring such private matters into public, he hissed. I would, Eliza affirmed. I have nothing left to lose. My family has already disowned me. My reputation is in tatters. But you, Thomas, you have your political ambitions, your business associates. How would they react to court testimony about what you do behind closed doors? It was a gamble. Divorce was difficult and scandalous, especially for women, but the threat hit its mark. Thomas's carefully cultivated public image was everything to him. You'll regret this, he said, but the threat sounded hollow now. He wheeled his horse around. Come on, Carson. The two men rode off into the darkness, Thomas's rigid back radiating fury. Eliza watched until they disappeared from sight, the revolver still clutched in her hands. "You did well," Owen said quietly beside her. The adrenaline that had sustained her ebbed suddenly, leaving her shaking. Owen gently took the gun from her hands and guided her inside to the fire. "He'll be back," she said once she could speak again. "Maybe not tonight, but soon, with the sheriff or a lawyer or some other way to force me to return." Owen stirred the fire, adding another log. "Maybe. But you've shown your hand now the threat of public scandal. For a man like Bennett, that might be deterrent enough. And if it isn't," he looked at her directly, his blue eyes serious in the firelight, "then we'll face it together." "I meant what I said," Eliza told him. "About seeking a divorce, I should have done it sooner, but I was afraid." "And now I'm still afraid," she admitted. "But staying his wife frightens me more." Owen nodded. "We'll ride to Cheyenne next week. There's a lawyer there who might help." "Territory divorce laws are more favorable than back east." Eliza questioned. "Unless you'd rather go alone." "No," she said quickly. "No, I wouldn't." Something shifted in Owen's expression, a softening around his eyes. "Then we'll go together. Family stands together." The word family hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. "Thank you," she said simply. Owen reached across the space between them, his calloused hand covering hers briefly. "Get some rest. Been a long night." In her room, Eliza sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, replaying the confrontation. She had stood her ground against Thomas, found her voice after years of being silenced. The fear remained, but something new had taken root alongside it, a tentative hope that perhaps she could truly be free. The journey to Cheyenne took 3 days on horseback. Owen insisted Eliza learn to ride properly rather than use the wagon, reasoning that she might someday need to make a quick escape. The first day was agony, muscles protesting movements they'd never made before. But by the third day, she'd found her rhythm, moving with the horse rather than against it. Cheyenne was larger and more developed than Riverton, boasting brick buildings, hotels, and the territorial government offices. They found lodging in a respectable boarding house where Owen took a room down the hall from Eliza's, maintaining propriety while staying close enough should trouble arise. The lawyer, Mr. Holbrook, was initially skeptical about taking Eliza's case. Divorce was difficult to obtain, especially for women, and doubly so when the husband opposed it. But when Eliza calmly detailed Thomas's abuse, producing a letter from Dr. Wells documenting her injuries, and explained her willingness to testify publicly, the lawyer's attitude changed. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, using her married name with reluctance, "Wyoming Territory has more progressive laws regarding women than many places. If what you say is true, and these witnesses will corroborate your account, you may indeed have grounds for divorce on the basis of cruelty." "It's true," Eliza confirmed steadily. "Then I'll file the petition. But you should understand this will take time, months possibly, and your husband will fight it. I understand. You'll need to remain in the territory during proceedings. Do you have a safe place to stay?" "She does," Owen answered from where he stood by the window. "With me." Mr. Holbrook raised an eyebrow but made no comment. "Very well. I'll draw up the papers today. You can sign them tomorrow and I'll file immediately." As they left the lawyer's office, Eliza felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was only the first step in a difficult journey, but it was a step nonetheless. "What now?" she asked as they walked down Cheyenne's busy main street. "Supplies," Owen answered. "And then something I've been meaning to show you." They spent an hour at the general store, purchasing items unavailable in Riverton's smaller shops. Afterward, Owen led her to a small jewelry store tucked between a gunsmith and a millinery. "Wait here," he said, disappearing inside before she could question him. When he emerged minutes later, his expression gave nothing away. "One more stop," he said, guiding her toward a photography studio. "A photograph?" Eliza asked, confused. "Whatever for memory," Owen replied, "of this day. Your first step to freedom." The photographer positioned them stiffly side by side, Owen standing behind Eliza's chair as was traditional. Just before the exposure, Owen placed his hand lightly on her shoulder, a gesture of support that would be immortalized in the image. "It will be ready tomorrow," the photographer told them. "Fine quality, I assure you." That evening, after dining in the boarding house's communal dining room, they sat in the small parlor. Other guests were present, so conversation remained general, but Eliza was acutely aware of Owen's presence beside her, his quiet strength a counterpoint to her swirling emotions. When they rose to retire for the night, Owen walked her to her door. "Sleep well," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Owen," she said, keeping her voice low. "Thank you for today, for everything." Something flickered in his eyes, some emotion quickly contained. No need for thanks between family. There was that word again, family. But increasingly, Eliza found herself wondering if that was truly what they were, or if they were becoming something else entirely. The next morning, after signing the divorce petition at Mr. Holbrook's office, they collected the photograph and began the journey home. 3 days of riding through Wyoming's autumn landscape, the aspens golden against the evergreens. Nights spent camping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. On their final night before reaching Riverton, as they sat beside the campfire, Owen finally spoke of what had been growing between them. "Eliza," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "there's something I need to say." She looked up from the coffee she was stirring, her heart suddenly racing. "Yes, these past weeks, having you at the ranch." He paused, searching for words. "It's changed things, for me too," she admitted softly. "When I offered to be your family, I meant it honestly, no expectations beyond that." His eyes met hers across the fire. "But now I find myself wanting more." The simple confession hung in the night air between them, honest and unadorned as the man himself. "What kind of more?" Eliza asked, needing clarity after years of Thomas's manipulations. "The kind where I could court you properly." "Once your divorce is final." He looked away, uncomfortable with such direct expression of feeling. "If you were amenable." Eliza set her coffee cup down carefully. "And if I said I was amenable now," Owen's gaze snapped back to hers. "You're still married, technically." "In name only," she pointed out. "In my heart, that marriage ended the night I fled. Even so." His sense of honor was unyielding. "I won't give Bennett or anyone else cause to question your character or the sincerity of my intentions." "And what are your intentions, Owen Wyatt?" Eliza asked, bold in a way she'd never been before meeting him. A smile tugged at his lips, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "To marry you if you'll have me, to build a life together." His voice softened. "To give you the happiness you deserve." Joy blossomed in Eliza's chest, fierce and bright. "I think I'd like that very much," she said. "But Owen, are you certain? I come with complications. Thomas, the divorce." "I'm certain," he said simply. "Have been for a while now." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Bought this in Cheyenne, not for now, for later, when the time is right." He handed it to her. "But I want you to have it now, as a promise." Eliza unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Like I said, not for wearing yet, just for keeping, until you're free." Eliza closed her fingers around the ring, its solid presence a tangible symbol of the future they might share. "I'll keep it safe," she promised. "And when the time comes, I'll wear it proudly." Owen nodded, satisfied. "That's all I ask." They returned to the ranch the following day, slipping back into their routine with a new awareness between them. They were careful to maintain propriety both for Eliza's reputation and the pending divorce, but small changes marked the shift in their relationship. Owen's hand lingering a moment longer when helping her down from her horse. Eliza preparing his favorite meals. Evenings spent planning improvements to the ranch that reflected a shared future. November arrived with the first snows, transforming the landscape into a white wilderness. The world narrowed to the warmth of the cabin, the daily chores, and the companionable silence they shared. Then in early December came news from Cheyenne. Mr. Holbrook's letter, delivered by a neighbor passing through, contained unexpected information. "Thomas isn't contesting the divorce," Eliza said incredulously, reading the letter aloud. "He's agreed to all terms, including my freedom from any claims he might make on my person or property." Owen looked up from the harness he was repairing. "That's unexpected. Mr. Holbrook says Thomas has announced plans to move to Denver." Apparently, he's secured a business partnership there. She continued reading. The divorce should be finalized by February, barring any complications. February, Owen repeated thoughtfully, sooner than we expected. Yes. Eliza folded the letter carefully. Mr. Holbrook advises me to remain circumspect until then, to give Thomas no reason to change his mind. Wise advice. Owen returned to his work, but Eliza could see the tension in his shoulders had eased. February isn't so far away. No, she agreed, her fingers unconsciously touching the pocket where she kept his ring. Not so far at all. Christmas came and went quietly, marked only by special meals and small, practical gifts. They exchanged new gloves for Owen, a warm shawl for Eliza. New Year brought a blizzard that kept them snowbound for 3 days, the wind howling around the cabin while they played cards by lamplight, told stories, and planned for spring planting. January stretched cold and white before them, each day bringing them closer to February and the freedom that awaited. They heard through town gossip, carried by the mail carrier, that Thomas had indeed left for Denver, his house in Riverton standing empty. Then one bitter February morning, another letter arrived from Mr. Holbrook. Eliza's hands trembled as she broke the seal. It's done, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The divorce is final, I'm free. Owen crossed the room slowly, as if giving her time to absorb the news. Truly free, truly. She looked up at him, tears of relief shining in her eyes. No longer Eliza Bennett, just Eliza Campbell again. He took her hands in his, work-roughened fingers gentle against her skin. I can think of another name that might suit you, he said quietly. Eliza's breath caught. Can you now? Owen knelt before her, still holding her hands. No flowery speech, no grand gestures, just the simple truth of his heart. Eliza Campbell, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? She withdrew one hand from his grasp, reaching into her pocket for the ring she'd carried close these past months. Pressing it into his palm, she smiled through her tears. Yes, Owen Wyatt, yes, I will. He slipped the pearl ring onto her finger, a perfect fit just as he'd hoped. When he stood and drew her into his arms for the first time, it felt like coming home. They were married 2 weeks later in the Riverton church. A simple ceremony with few guests, just the ranch neighbors who'd become friends. The lawyer Mr. Holbrook who'd traveled from Cheyenne, and surprisingly, Dr. Wells and his wife, who had supported Eliza's divorce petition despite Thomas's influence. Eliza wore a new dress of deep blue wool, practical yet beautiful. Owen wore his best suit, his normally unruly hair tamed for the occasion. Their vows were traditional, but spoken with such evident sincerity that the minister later remarked he'd seldom witnessed a union so clearly blessed. Spring came early that year, as if nature itself approved of their marriage. The ranch flourished under their joint care, Owen's practical knowledge combining with Eliza's eye for beauty and comfort. They added rooms to the cabin, planted an orchard, expanded the cattle herd. News came occasionally from town that Thomas had indeed settled in Denver, remarried to a banker's daughter, his past in Riverton apparently forgotten. Eliza's family maintained their silence, the disownment complete, and she had come to realize, a blessing in disguise. They had never truly seen her, only the reflection of their own ambitions. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Eliza shared news of her own. Owen, she said, taking his hand. I believe we'll need to add another bedroom to the cabin. It took him a moment to understand her meaning. When he did, the joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the plains. A child, he asked, his voice hushed with wonder. Truly, Doctor. Wells confirms it, she said, smiling. By winter we'll be 3. Owen gathered her gently into his arms, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. I never thought, he began, emotion making his voice rough. After the war, I never thought I'd have this, a wife, a child. A real family. You gave me family when I had none, Eliza reminded him, leaning into his embrace. Now we're building our own. Their son, Samuel, was born on a cold December night with Dr. Wells in attendance. A strong, healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Owen held him with hands that trembled slightly, overcome by the miracle of new life. "Hello, Samuel Wyatt," he whispered. "Welcome to our family." Eliza watched them from the bed, exhausted but radiantly happy. This was what family truly meant, not the rigid expectations of her parents or the cruel domination of Thomas, but this. Love freely given, promises kept, a future built together day by day. As Samuel grew, so did the ranch. Owen's careful management and Eliza's contribution, including her surprisingly shrewd head for business, transformed their modest operation into one of the most successful in the county. They added more land, more cattle, hired hands to help with the expanding work. Their family grew too. A daughter, Laura, joined them 2 years after Samuel, followed by another son, Joseph, 3 years later. Their home rang with children's laughter, a sound that healed old wounds neither had realized still needed healing. Riverton grew as well, the railroad's arrival bringing new prosperity. With it came changes in attitude. When Eliza ventured into town with her children, she was no longer met with whispers and sidelong glances, but with the respect accorded to a successful rancher's wife. The scandal of her divorce faded into memory, replaced by admiration for the thriving family the Wyatts had built. 10 years after they first met, Owen and Eliza hosted a harvest celebration at their ranch. Neighbors, friends, and business associates gathered to mark the end of a particularly bountiful season. Among the guests was a new family in town, the Robertsons, recently arrived from Philadelphia. During the festivities, Mrs. Robertson drew Eliza aside. "Mrs. Wyatt," she said hesitantly, "I hope you'll forgive my intrusion, but I believe we have an acquaintance in common." "The Campbell family," Eliza stilled. "My parents," she acknowledged cautiously. "Yes, before we left Philadelphia, your mother asked me to give you something should I happen to meet you." She pressed a sealed envelope into Eliza's hands. She said it was long overdue. Heart pounding, Eliza excused herself and sought privacy in her bedroom. The letter inside was brief but life-changing. "My dearest Eliza, pride has kept me silent these 10 years, pride and the fear of your father's disapproval. But I can remain silent no longer. I was wrong to disown you. Wrong to choose convention over my daughter's happiness and safety. Your father passed last winter. In his final days, he spoke of you with regret, though he could never bring himself to write. I am not so stubborn. I wish to know my grandchildren, if you will permit it. To make amends, if that is possible." With love and hope for forgiveness, mother tears blurred Eliza's vision. A decade of silence and now this olive branch. When Owen found her, she showed him the letter wordlessly. "What will you do?" he asked after reading it. Eliza considered the question carefully. "Invite her to visit," she decided. "The past cannot be undone, but perhaps the future can be different." Owen nodded, understanding as always. "Family is family," he said simply, "even when they falter, Mrs. Campbell arrived the following spring, a slightly bent figure with silver hair and Eliza's green eyes. The reunion was tearful but healing, old wounds beginning to mend as she met her grandchildren for the first time. She stayed the entire summer, helping with the garden, teaching Laura to embroider, telling Samuel and Joseph stories of their mother's childhood. When she departed in autumn, it was with promises to return the following year and regular letters in between. Another piece of Eliza's heart, long fractured, began to heal. Life continued its steady rhythm on the Wyatt ranch. There were difficult years, drought, illness, the banking panic that threatened their financial security. But there were far more good years, abundant harvests, children growing strong and capable, love deepening with each passing season. On their 20th anniversary, Owen surprised Eliza with a gift, the photograph taken in Cheyenne all those years ago, now framed in silver. They had changed, both of them. Silver threaded their hair, lines marked their faces. But the essential truth captured in that image remained. They stood together, facing whatever came. "Do you ever regret it?" Eliza asked that night as they sat on the porch, watching the same stars that had witnessed their beginning. Taking in a desperate woman with nothing to offer but trouble, Owen's laugh was soft in the darkness. "Best decision I ever made, even with all the complications." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the pearl ring she still wore. Eliza, when I said I'd be your family, I had no idea what I was promising, no idea how much more we would become to each other. He paused, gathering thoughts. I offered shelter, but you gave purpose. I offered protection, but you gave partnership. Fair trade, I'd say. Eliza leaned against his shoulder, content in the life they'd built together. More than fair, she agreed, a blessing neither of us expected. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully. Around them, the ranch sprawled, testament to years of shared labor and vision. Beyond that, the Wyoming night stretched endless and beautiful, just as it had on the evening she'd first arrived, terrified and alone. Then I'll be your family now, Owen had said that day, a simple offer that had changed everything, and he had been. He was. They were family in the truest sense, not bound by obligation or convention but by choice, by love renewed each day. By the decision, made again and again through good times and bad, to stand together. As stars wheeled overhead and the coyotes sang their ancient songs to the moon, Eliza Wyatt closed her eyes and gave silent thanks for second chances, for courage found in desperate moments, and for the man beside her who had taught her what family really meant.